To our English-speaking auditors, this episode is in English, though there is a short introduction in French. Et pour nos auditeurs qui sont francophones, donc on a réalisé une interview avec Rich Handley, qui est entièrement en anglais, mais par contre il y a quand même une petite introduction et une petite conclusion en français. Bonne écoute à tous.
Shut up, you freak! Surely it's you. I said shut up! It's a madhouse! A madhouse! Take your sticky paws off me, you damn dirty ape! You maniac! You blew it up! Oh, damn you! God damn you all to hell! Apes! Do not want war!
Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue dans cette émission un petit peu particulière puisqu'il s'agit d'un genre de crossover absolument incroyable entre les trois meilleurs podcasts francophones dans leur partie. Je dis ça évidemment parce que en fait on est les trois seuls dans notre partie chacun. Nous avons donc le podcast Cornelius, n'importe quoi, Cornelius and Zira qui est représenté par le docteur Zaius. Salut Zaius, comment vas-tu ?
Alors écoute, je vais super bien. Je suis très excité par cet épisode qui s'annonce.
Excellent. Allez, pour les personnes qui ne connaissent pas quand même, Cornelius and Zira, c'est quel podcast et ça parle de quoi ?
Donc c'est un podcast qui est dédié principalement à l'univers de la planète des singes.
C'est cool. Et nous avons également le podcast GalactiFrak, représenté par l'homme à qui il arrive des milliards de trucs absolument incroyables, Draven. Bonjour Draven, comment ça va ?
Salut. Ça va, super, nickel. Ouais, excellent.
C'est une manière un peu étrange de te présenter, mais c'est parce que j'ai écouté au moment où j'ai rédigé ces lignes. En fait, j'étais en train d'écouter
Artefrak,
et dans lequel tu racontais des histoires complètement improbables. J'adore ce podcast. Et du coup, GalactiFrak, ça parle de quoi ?
GalactiFrak, ça parle de BattleStar Galactica sous toutes les coutures. C'est un petit peu une encyclopédie sous forme de podcast, c'est-à-dire qu'on part de la série originale et on va tout passer en revue, les spin-offs, puis ensuite la série moderne, et puis il y a des épisodes où on parle des coulisses de la saga, et des épisodes où on décortique les épisodes de la série. Enfin, il y a vraiment tout. En fait, le but, c'est de pouvoir aborder un max de trucs sur BattleStar Galactica.
Et tu es accompagné de Karine, que l'on salue.
Et oui, je ne suis pas seul, effectivement. Heureusement qu'il y a Karine avec moi pour les épisodes Analytica, ceux où on décortique les épisodes des séries télé. Ouais, on s'amuse beaucoup à faire ça.
C'est très sympa. Et j'ai pas salué les personnes qui sont avec Zaius, parce qu'en fait, il y en a trop.
Ouais, c'est vrai que... Ouais. C'est vrai qu'il y a un sacré casting dans Cornelius and Zira. Il y a des invités récurrents.
Et puis Master Fred qui est.
Ouais, Master Fred qui m'a aidé principalement à traiter les 5 films de la saga classique. Et puis voilà, il y a des intervenants, divers intervenants, tous aussi sympathiques et passionnants les uns que les autres.
Et du coup, et moi-même, Rémi. Alors déjà, il faut noter que je suis le seul à ne pas me cacher mon identité secrète, à côté de Zaius et Draven. Moi, je représente le podcast Star Trek pour les nuls. Alors, Star Trek pour les nuls, on parle évidemment de Star Trek. Voilà, on regarde les films et certains épisodes de séries, certains bouquins, certaines comic books, et on en parle tous ensemble. Alors, au début de l'émission, je disais qu'on était les trois seuls dans notre partie. Star Trek pour les nuls, c'est pas exactement le seul, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a eu déjà Parlons Trek. Star Trek pour les nuls, c'est un peu l'enfant de Parlons Trek, qui a cessé de fonctionner, et Pod Trek, qui n'aimait plus depuis environ 2 ans. Du coup, ça me permet de passer un geste, un coucou à Mario et Eric. Si vous nous entendez, s'il vous plaît, revenez, parce que moi j'adore vos émissions. Elles étaient super cool et puis très intéressant. Donc, Je disais aujourd'hui, c'est une émission un peu incroyable parce qu'en fait, nous sommes réunis, Zaius, Raven et moi, car nous avons eu une opportunité improbable. Rich Handley, éditeur et auteur de beaucoup de livres sur les grands univers fictifs, a accepté de nous donner une interview. Et du coup, en fait, voilà, on a sauté sur l'occasion tous les trois et du coup, on va vous la transmettre. Alors, elle a été enregistrée avant qu'on enregistre cette introduction, donc on en sort tout juste. Et on va vous donner un peu nos ressentiments, nos sentiments de ce truc dans environ 1h30, 2h, je crois. Je sais plus exactement combien de temps ça fait.
Un peu moins de 2 heures, ouais.
Ouais, c'est 1h40, ouais. Voilà, à tout de suite.
À tout de suite. Okay, so let's say I'm the BattleStar Galactica guy here. I'm the host of a podcast called GalactiFrak, which deals with the whole franchise, and I make several kinds of episodes. Some episodes are just recaps of the series, and right now we are dealing with the original series, and next we'll go to Galactica 1980, and then to the Ron Moore's version. And there are also episodes where I tell the whole story behind the scenes of the franchise. So, well, that's me. That's the Galactica guy.
I actually one of the books that I did basically mirrors a lot of what you said. It's a book about the Battlestar Galactica universe. So you and I have like minds.
I have it somewhere beyond the heavens, right?
That's it. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I bought it on the Kindle, and I like it. It's very nice and good source of information for some episodes. So thank you for that, by the way.
Sure. Thank you.
No problem.
Rémi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay. So I am Rémi, and I am the one who speaks very badly English, but I understand quite well. I am the Star Trek guy. I have a podcast that's name is Star Trek for Dummies, and we found people who doesn't know Star Trek. We show them some movies or episodes, and then we speak about it. So I don't know much what to say else. So I will not speak very much tonight. Jérôme and Zaius will do it for me, because I
don't think you speak badly at all. I think I fully understand you, and you and I have been corresponding for months, and I've never had a single problem understanding you. I think you're underselling yourself.
Okay, thank you. But I think this is because you are not so stupid as you said earlier. Well, that's all about me.
Yeah, I actually don't speak a word of French, so you're one up on me on that one. So yeah, by all means, speak whatever language you wish, but I will need a translation.
Okay.
And
you want me to go next, or?
Oh. Well,
no, I'm sorry. There's 3 of you. I forgot. By all means, please. I can't count today, see?
Yeah, so, well, I'm Dr. Zaius. So, very surprisingly, I'm the Planet of the Apes guy.
I can't imagine.
I'm the host of a podcast which is called Cornelius and Zira. And I mean, it's mainly dedicated to Planet of the Apes, but not only. But so far, I've treated mostly the classic movies. I mean, I've started with Pierre Boulle's novel, obviously, and then we have talked at length of the 5 first movies. But when I say at length, really, we took a lot of time to go through all the scripts and the behind the scenes and so on and so forth. And I've also talked a bit about the comic books and about some novels, about we've tweeted as well about Tales from the Forbidden Zone. So thank you for that, by the way.
I think I know that.
Yeah, so so that's it. Yeah, that's what we talk about in Cornelius and Zira.
And I should say that I've interacted with Dr. Zayas many times on Facebook groups, so yes, I know you. If you want, I can introduce myself as well, since some of your listeners may have no idea who I am. So, my name is Rich Handley. I'm a writer and editor based out of New York. Currently, I'm the editor of Eagle Moss's Star Trek graphic novel collection, which is a series of hardcover books reprinting and collecting comics, the Star Trek series of comics going back to the Gold Key days in the 1960s. Our goal is to reprint everything. I'm not sure how long the series will run, particularly because the coronavirus has kind of taken everybody's plans at every company and balled it up into a knot and thrown it out the window. So who knows where that's going to go. But for now, I'm hoping to see it last long enough to reprint absolutely everything. My head may be in the clouds on that one. We'll have to see. I've also written contributed, or edited a number of books about Planet of the Apes and Star Trek and we'll see what else. Back to the Future, Watchmen, Star Wars, DC Comics, Hellblazer, and a bunch of other topics. I've done books for Sequart, DC Comics, Boom Studios, IDW, and to keep things in what you guys are doing. I've done a lot of writing about Star Trek and Planet of the Apes over the years. For Galactica, it's just been the one book that was brought up before, and I appreciate that plug. Tales from the Forbidden Zone, which you mentioned, was for Titan Books. That was a short fiction anthology that I co-edited with Jim Beard, and I've worked on other Planet of the Apes books for Boom Studios and some other publishers. And I write a weekly Star Trek column for Hero Collector. And I guess that's good enough. That was pretty long, so I guess that's good enough.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
All right.
So who shall start? Who shall ask the first question?
Well, we say Jérôme.
Okay, one of mine. Okay, why not? If you had to convince someone who's never watched it, what would be, according to you, the greatest value of the original Battlestar Galactica series today? And this question also applies to the original Planet of the Apes movies or the original Star Trek series, which might seem quite dated to young guys today.
What you're asking, what's the greatest value? I mean, why should they watch it?
Yeah.
Well, for one thing, in the case of all three franchises, they're a piece of history, and those of us who are older, I'm in my 50s, so I count myself in that group. Those of us who are older grew up on this stuff, but younger, and so for us, it doesn't seem quaint or dated at all. But even for people who are younger, there's a lot of value in it. I've shown all of Galactica to my son, who's 18. We marathoned everything, and we've also marathoned all of Planet of the Apes. And so at the time I was about 50, so he would have been 16, and we were both still. He was enjoying it just as much as I always have. I would say the value is it in all three cases are actually it's interesting, specifically Apes and Star Trek, but it's true for Galactica as well, in that there were strong messages that were being given out. There was great writing, there was great acting, but there was a lot that was being said about the time in which that they were being made. In the case of Star Trek, which was made in the 60s, there were messages about the war, and about bigotry and about fascism and religious dogmatism and the importance of freedom. In the case of Planet of the Apes, anti-racism messages and science versus religion and the dangers of proliferation of the nuclear and atomic weaponry, the folly of mankind, the fact that we would bring about our own downfall and be arrogant enough to assume it was someone else. You know, the big surprise at the end of the first Apes film is that Zaius isn't really the villain of that movie. It's Taylor's own people. Zaius is doing the protecting. So from a weird standpoint, the villain and the hero switch. In the case of Galactica, I would say that the value is a little different because, and I grew up on the original, so this is in no way a knock on it. I love it. It's a little, it's a little cheesy compared to the other two franchises.
I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah. There's a certain cheese value, especially when you get to characters like Hector and Vector that make you want to slam your head into the wall.
Oh my God! Yeah.
But what's great about the original Galactica, in my opinion, is that it's incredibly fun. There's a certain sense of giddiness that you get out of it. And squeezed in between is there are some powerful messages as well that are on par with the other two franchises, but with a much bigger grin on your face while you're watching it. In all three cases, there's some really amazing acting. There's some really bad acting too.
Yeah.
And that's part of the fun. In the case of Planet of the Apes, there's remarkably little bad acting. Actually, I have to give them a lot of credit. The cast is really quite spectacular right across the board. Star Trek and Galactica, the acting is a mixed bag back in the 60s and 70s versions of those franchises, but the writing is often amazing, and that carries it. And that's why I would say anybody, regardless of their age, should give them a shot. It's easy for people who are younger to say, I only like the new Galactica or the new Planet of the Apes movies, or I only like the Abrams films, or I only watch the stuff that's on CBS All Access. But there's a certain value to the old shows because they remind us of the way the world was, and it gives us a unique perspective on how it is now.
Okay. Thank you very much for this answer.
Sure.
Zaius, go. You got plenty of them.
My questions are very specific, so that's. but no, since you were talking about the books you wrote, and I mean there are a lot of books in my shelves that have been indeed edited by yourself.
I hope they're good books in any case.
I love them, and they're very helpful, especially for someone like me who happened to host a show dedicated to Planet of the Apes, and there are two very specific books. I mean, two great efforts, and I have a lot of questions regarding this. I mean, I'm thinking about Timeline of the Planet of the Apes and Lexicon of the Planet of the Apes. I would like to know how much time did it take to gather all this information, and maybe just you can summarize, explain to our auditors the purpose of these two books.
Certainly. First of all, the amount of time it took to write them, I first had to invent time travel because I had to put myself in a bubble where I would have 257 years to write them. After I did that, because there was an absurd amount of work that went into writing those. I still look back and say, like, was I suffering a head injury the week that I decided to write those? I don't know. There was just an insane amount of research that went into those. But there's an interesting story behind their genesis. I believe, if I remember correctly, that was 2008 and 2010 that those two came out. If I'm wrong, that's embarrassing because they're my books, but I think they were 2008 and 2010. At the time, Ed Gross, who was one of the authors of Planet of the Apes Revisited, contacted me. He was going to launch his own publishing imprint, and what was it called? Timeline? I think it was called Timeline Books. And he asked, the idea was to find people who he considered experts on a given franchise and ask them to write books that he would publish. And so at the time, I had put up a very rudimentary Planet of the Apes timeline online. It was short. It was nowhere near the insanely long amount of stuff that I put into the book. But he said, would you be interested in turning this into a book? And I said, well, I'm not stupid. Of course I am. Of course I'll do it. So I had most of the book written, and then Ed's circumstances changed, and he never launched Timeline Books. And I said, okay, well, I'll just keep doing this anyway, and at some point it'll be published. So I didn't have an endpoint in mind, is where I'm going with this. Because I didn't have an endpoint in mind, since I didn't have a publisher, I just kept sticking as much information into the book as I could and figured, well, whenever it's done, it's done. Well, the idea behind it, because to go back to your original question, was to say, if all of Planet of the Apes can be seen as a multiverse, so take out of the equation the idea of what's canon and what's not, because frankly, I hate the word canon. I think fans spend far too much time arguing over it. I'm more in my philosophy is if you enjoy something, it has value. If it has the arbitrary canon label on it or not, shouldn't affect whether or not you enjoy it. I enjoy Planet of the Apes. Therefore, I wanted to take a look at how every single version of it, the movies, the TV show, the cartoon, the novels, the comics, the scripts that weren't filmed, how do they relate to each other in terms of when stuff is said to take place, chronologically. And then I started putting it all in a single timeline with the caveat in the introduction that, yeah, of course, these things don't all take place in the same timeline. Anyone who thinks that the cartoon and the Tim Burton movie are the same timeline is stoned. So, but because I don't really care about the canon argument, I just said, regardless, I'm going to say this says this takes place in 2029, this takes place in 3978, so that you can compare one aspect of the franchise to the next. And then I started trying to make sense of all of it, because where do the Marvel comics and the Malibu comics take place in relation to each other, that sort of thing. While I was doing all of this, I realized there was a potential for a second book, because I had taken such an absurd amount of notes on these things that I said I could also get a lexicon, which I kind of regret choosing the name lexicon. I thought that it was a common word, but I can't tell you how many times people have asked me since then, what's a lexicon?
Oh, really?
Yeah, I thought everybody knew what a lexicon was, but apparently not. So basically a lexicon is an encyclopedia. I'm sure you guys know this, but it was basically, so the second book became, based on my research from the first book, an encyclopedia of every person, place, thing, event, the most minutia that I could come up with, alphabetical. And then my friend Paul Giacchetti, unfortunately, who passed away a few years ago, did all of the designing on those books. And then an absolutely amazing artist named Pat Carbajal did all the illustrations. I'm rambling. I apologize. Have I answered your question? Because I've lost track.
No, I think so. And by the way, I've checked, and you're right. The first edition of Timeline, it's back in November 2008, and Lexicon has been published in December 2010. So you were correct.
Okay, so I guess I'm not as coronavirus stupid as I thought I was. That's good. Okay. I still have some brain cells functioning. That's actually pretty reassuring.
That's great. Yeah, that's great news. Zayus, you're okay?
Yeah, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I'll ask one of Rémi's questions about Star Trek.
Star Trek, what's that? Just kidding.
The question is simple. How did you discover Star Trek?
This is actually kind of a fun story. And this is not even me being silly. This is true. I was 1 year old, and I was sitting in my diaper next to my mom.
All right.
my mom watched Star Trek when it was on the air. My mother was a sci-fi fanatic. She got me into Planet of the Apes. She got me into Battlestar Galactica. Pretty much most of the stuff that I'm into, she was into in the 1960s, the Twilight Zone, the Outer Limits. And so when Star Trek, the original series, was still on the air, I was a baby. So I can technically say that I watched the original series.
Mhm.
I'd be lying if I said that I remember watching the original series. That would be a complete lie. But
Okay.
I can genuinely say I watched it simply because I was sitting in the room. But Star Trek went into syndication and reruns in 1972. I was 4 years old, and at that point, my mom started watching it again. So
Okay.
I grew up always seeing Star Trek on the air, and a local station, Channel 11, ran it all the time. It basically should have been called the Twilight Zone, Star Trek, and Honeymooners channel, because those three shows were on all the time. And when they were, I watched them. So growing up, I was a Star Trek fan very early on, for the simple fact that it was, for the same reason I was a Planet of the Apes fan. It was something my mom and I did together when I was a kid. But
Okay.
I grew to see the value of it, because when I was a kid, Star Trek was cool because Captain Kirk got to beat up a giant lizard. I wasn't really, like, I saw it differently than I did as I got older.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a good story. Yeah. I'd like to say something like that about Galactica, which technically was on the air while I was a little kid in France, but I have no memory of this.
I genuinely have no memory of what I just said. My mom
Okay.
tells me, because I was 1 year old. So I'd be lying if I said, yeah, when I was a baby, I used to love Star Trek. That's not true.
Well, you see, my son is 4 years old, and he watched the animated series with me, the Star Trek animated series, and the Planet of the Apes animated series, and he loves it, but he absolutely do not understand anything. But this is fun because sometimes he tells me, "Oh, this is like Star Trek," and when you saw a strange car, or something like that, and this is so. I love it when he say that.
I totally get that. I'm very excited about the fact that my son is into so many things that I'm into. The two of us have watched all of Battlestar Galactica, all of Planet of the Apes, all of the James Bond movies. All of Stargate. Like, he just enjoys watching the stuff. Right now, we're watching all of the Arrowverse. What I cannot get him into is Star Trek. I tried. He got through about half a season and decided it sucked. And I thought,
Bummer.
wow, my very favorite franchise, and he doesn't have any interest in it. So every now and then I'll say, hey Josh, you want to watch Star Trek 2: The Wrath of Khan with me? And he'll be like, yeah, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I maybe go ahead also with a question from Rémi.
Sure.
Maybe I will just amend it a bit. My question is that being a huge fan of Star Trek, Galactica, Planet of the Apes, and so on and so forth, does it have an influence on your everyday life?
Well, the answer now would be different than it was years ago. Years ago, it was a hobby. I mean, like decades ago, it was just a hobby. It was something that I did for myself. Because I enjoyed reading the novels, and I collected all the comics, and I had posters on my wall. This is going back years ago. So did it affect my life? Well, I mean, anything that you're into affects your life, because it becomes something you focus on to the exclusion of all else. Even people who are into baseball or football or basketball, it affects their life, even if they don't play the sport. So in that regard, yes, it of course always did. But it affects my life differently now, because starting in the 1990s, it became part of my career. So it is no longer, I used to say to people that there are times when, and this is unfortunate, there are times when your hobby becomes your career, and you suddenly like it less. That's unfortunate, but it's unfortunately true. In that, if I'm getting paid to watch something and write about it versus my choosing to sit and watch it, my reaction to it is different, because I'm now watching it from the standpoint of having no choice but watch it. So that has definitely changed. To put it in terms everyone would understand, think about the people who already worked at home before the coronavirus. I've worked at home for years, so I pretty much sat in my basement all the time to begin with, and never found it frustrating. I never felt like I was in prison. But once the quarantine started, suddenly I wanted to get out of the house. And right now I'm going stir crazy because I can't leave. But that's stupid because for 15 years I've been sitting in the exact same room. So why is it bothering me? It's because now I have to. Versus before, when I could get up and leave anytime I wanted. So the funny thing about being into all these franchises is that once they became part of my career, there were times when I wanted to turn them off.
I get it. Yeah. The idea of choice disappears, and maybe some fun disappears with it too. I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
A little bit, but the good news is it always comes back. There's never been a point where I said, I hate Planet of the Apes.
Okay.
or Battlestar Galactica, that's for losers. I've never said anything like that. It's always been, okay, I need to walk out of the room. I need to go for a walk. I need to take a drink. I'll watch Star Trek tomorrow. And then tomorrow I go, God, I love Star Trek. So I never really walk away from it, but when I have to be thinking about it all the time, when I do the work I do right now for the Star Trek graphic novel collection, there's a lot of work that goes into producing these books. And so there are days where I finish my day job. By day, my day job is that I'm the managing editor of a technology magazine. So I finish that, and then I spend the next 6 hours rereading old Star Trek comics and writing about them. And it's fun. I mean, the fact that I'm getting paid for that's pretty remarkable because I've been reading them for years, even when I wasn't getting paid for it.
Yeah.
But there are days when I go, I never want to see a Star Trek comic again,
Understandable.
I think I got away from Rémi's question, though. I apologize.
Well, I think it's a great answer.
Oh, okay.
I go next.
Anybody?
Anybody?
I'm standing up against the wall. Fire.
Okay. I'll try this one. I know that you wrote a short Battlestar Galactica story for an anthology back in the day, even though it was never published because Realm Press Comics dropped the license. And you also wrote or edited stories made for other IPs. And my question is it hard or easy to write stuff for a franchise that you're a big fan of? What would be your advice regarding that matter?
Okay, first of all, I love this question, and I'll tell you why. In 25 years of my doing this, you are the very first person ever to ask me about that Battlestar Galactica comic that I wrote that wasn't published. Okay. So I love the fact that just came up. No one has ever mentioned it to me before. So nice research on that one.
No problem.
Well, basically, to start at the beginning of that question, back when Realm Press had the Galactica license, I was still a very new writer, and I'm the kind of guy who, so if I decide I want to write something, I will be a total pest to publishers. So I'll say, you know what? I should be writing about this topic. What's every publisher that does stuff on this topic? I'm going to really bug them.
Okay.
Oh. At least I should say I did that when I was younger. I don't do it now because I'm older and realize that that's annoying. But when I was younger and trying to establish myself, that's what I did. So I reached out to Jim Kuhorik, who was on the editorial team at Realm and also was writing a lot of the comics, and introduced myself. I went up to him at a convention, introduced myself, and offered my services if ever he needed a writer. And to my surprise, he was looking for one at that moment. And instead, what ended up happening was I ended up proofreading a few of the Realm Press Battlestar Galactica comics for him as an assistant editor. And just the last couple of issues, Search for Sanctuary, and I forget what the other one was, but there were two that I edited for him. And then he told me he was doing an anthology comic that was going to come out that was going to have 6 to 10 short stories based on Battlestar Galactica, and he wanted to know if I wanted to write one of them. I was thrilled because I was really very much a new writer at the time, and a lot of my writing credits were things like school board meetings for newspapers. It was not interesting. Yeah, so the idea that I was gonna be doing a Galactica comic was really damn cool.
Yeah.
So I wrote a story about Jolly because the idea behind this anthology was that it would not focus on Apollo and Starbuck. It would focus on characters people would not expect to see a story about, like Bree or Green Bean, right? Characters you don't normally see being spotlighted. So I said I wanted to write about Jolly, and the story was called A Jolly Good Fellow. I don't know if that translates well to French, but in English, A Jolly Good Fellow is the name of a song.
For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, which nobody can deny.
Yeah, I know the song, yeah.
Oh, okay, good. And so I wanted to write a story about him, giving him a love interest and having him save the day instead of just being the smiling guy who stands behind Starbuck and Apollo and then walks off the screen, which is what he usually is.
Yeah.
And so he really, Jim said he really liked it. It was all set to be in the issue. I even came up with a name for the anthology, which was Minor Difficulties. Since it was all about minor characters facing challenges, I suggested the name Minor Difficulties. And that was going to be the name. I'm sorry?
That's great. That's a great
Oh,
name.
Thank you. And then unfortunately, Realm Press went out of business, and the anthology never came out. So there's that. The second part of your question about it's like writing for a franchise. As it happens, the majority of my career, writing career, has been franchise work, almost all of it, and some of it's official, some of it's unofficial.
Okay.
You have more freedom unofficially. Obviously, you also have more likelihood of being sued, but you more freedom. When you're writing for a franchise, there's a certain challenge. There's a big thrill to it, but there's a certain challenge because if you're writing in the voice of characters, the reader has to be able to believe that that's something that a character would say. It was true for Jolly because Jolly didn't say much on television. So trying to put myself in Jolly's shoes, I mean, it was an interesting exercise. It's a lot easier to write for Starbuck. You just have him comment on women's looks and talk about gambling and then say, I'm going to go shoot something. That's Starbuck, right?
That's right.
Right, but it's a lot more difficult for a guy who just sort of stands around in an ill-fitting costume and then says, "Go get him, Starbuck," So that was but I tried very hard to find his voice, and I hope I did. Unfortunately, nobody will ever read it. Planet of the Apes, for the book Tales from the Forbidden Zone, which was a collection of short stories set throughout the Apes universe. I wrote a story about Caesar in his older days. He basically sometimes when people get older, they realize there's one thing in their life they never managed to accomplish. And in his case, he felt that he had never managed to make peace with the mutants living in New York City, living underneath the city. And so he reaches out to the leader, Mendez, the leader of the mutants, and tries to mend their ways after the war that they fought in the fifth Planet of the Apes movie. So in that case, I had to be able to write in the voice of Caesar and Mandemus, and actually not Mandemus. He's not. What am I saying? Mandemus is he in the story? Wait a minute.
No, I don't think so. But
yeah, I know he.
Virgil,
McDonald, Mendez, Alma. So there were characters from the movie Lisa, who I needed to write, and the challenge in that is that the readers are really scrutinizing. If you read a story based on Star Trek and you have Kirk say "Cheerio," the entire audience is going to go, "What the hell? Kirk would never yell Cheerio."
That's right.
Right. So it needs to, there needs to be a certain amount of authenticity involved. So there's a challenge. If you're creating your own work that's not in a franchise, you have so much more freedom.
Yeah.
You probably also have a smaller audience, though. See, there's a trade-off.
All right. So according to you, the greatest challenge is to step on the shoes of the characters.
Probably the greatest challenge is getting a publisher to hire you.
That's right.
Because for every person who's writing about Star Trek, there are 1,000 people going, "Can I please write about Star Trek?"
Yeah.
So
Sure.
the challenge really is getting someone to notice you.
Of
But
course.
once you're allowed to, if you're writing fiction, the greatest challenge I would say is authenticity. Because fans, I'm sure you've seen just people who watch the shows and movies, they will rip apart everything. But to like the most minor, most absurd degree, that Tribble has 2,000 hairs. A Tribble should have 2,004 hairs. Like that level of bizarre, authenticity is what's demanded. And so it could be a little daunting to say, I don't want to be the next guy whose writing was ripped apart.
Okay.
If you're writing nonfiction, it's a little different. The greatest challenge there probably is the fact that the universe is huge. You're talking, between 800 and 900 episodes, and you're talking thousands of novels and comics by the time you add everything up. And there's an overwhelmingly large chance that you're going to contradict something.
Yeah, that's
Unless
right.
you're a robot. If you're a robot and you can scan the pages into your brain and memorize them, cool. But otherwise, you're going to contradict something.
Yeah, that's right. But if you know someone who wrote a lexicon or a timeline, it could be helpful.
I actually
Okay.
do know someone. I see him in the mirror across the room. It's funny because when I started, I did my start, as I mentioned, doing newspapers. It was really dry, boring material. And then I started doing magazines. So I got my start in Star Trek by, I used to write for Star Trek Communicator. I don't know if you remember that magazine years ago, because I get the feeling you guys are younger than me. But Star Trek Communicator for years was the official Star Trek magazine. Now it's Star Trek Magazine. And I was a reporter for Star Trek Communicator. And that's kind of how I got my start, was writing for that magazine, writing for the Star Wars magazines. And so at the point where I decided to, in the 2000s to start transitioning to books, for whatever reason, I was writing timeline books. I did them for for Planet of the Apes, for Watchmen, for Back to the Future. And I wrote a Swamp Thing timeline book that still hasn't been published. I don't know why. I don't know why I was fixating on timelines. They're really hard. It's kind of like saying, I'm going to build a house and I'm going to make it 52 stories high. Wait, you don't need 52 stories. Why are you building a 52-story house? So if you say, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to write a timeline book, it's fun. But it's kind of like the 52-story house. Aim lower.
Okay.
And I wrote 4 of them. I don't know why.
All right, thank you for that.
Yeah, sure.
But since we were talking about anthology and unpublished work, I would like to talk a bit about Tales from the Forbidden Zone again. Because one of your story was not published. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, you wrote 2 stories for this book, isn't it?
Just do your research. You guys are good. I didn't actually write 2 stories. I know what you're referring to because I discussed it in the introduction. What am I correct in assuming that's what you're referring to? What I talked about in the intro?
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, thankfully I didn't write the other story because that would be very frustrating. Every time you write something that's not published, it's annoying. But what happened was, and it's actually, I had a good laugh about it. Jim Beard and I were cracking up about this at the time. When Titan Books accepted the proposal for the book, what they said was put together a list of writers. And we started reaching out to novelists and screenwriters and finding people who were interested in writing about it. And then once we had the author lineup approved by Titan Books, and Fox, we needed to each turn in a story outline, but just one paragraph, basically, of what we wanted to write about, just to make sure that neither Titan nor Fox had a problem with what the stories would be about. So we turned in 16 paragraphs saying John Jackson Miller is going to write about this, and Kevin Anderson's going to write about this, and etc. And 15 of them came back completely approved. 1 or 2 had a couple of minor things. It was really minor stuff like ask him to include this, but otherwise it's fine. So 15 of them came back with almost no changes, and 1 of them was rejected. And Jim and I were cracking up because it was mine. So I'm like, this book was my idea. Wait a minute. I came up with this. Why is my story the one that was rejected? All right. But what's funny about it is their reason for rejecting the idea was, I should backpedal here. The third movie, War for Planet of the Apes, hadn't come out yet. And so, and nobody knew what it was about other than the folks at Fox. And what they told me at the time was, it's a cool idea, but it's just too similar to what we're doing with the next movie. Oh. So you're going to need to come up with something else, which I thought was kind of funny. Like somehow I, on my own, came up with the plot of the third movie. So I had to come up with something else entirely. The weird part about it is when I went to see War for the Planet of the Apes, my first thought was, this is nothing like the story that I picked. There's no similarity. It would be like if I pitched the plot of Wesley Snipes' movie Blade, and you said, no, we're doing Frozen 2. You can't because they're the same story, right?
Wow.
And then people would be like, wait, what? So I watched War for Planet of the Apes and said, I love this movie. It's great. It's absolutely nothing like my story. So what happened?
Yes, so now you can say what was your story, because to be honest, I would like to know.
Well, I can tell you, but I'm going to be general simply because Jim and I hope someday that there will be a second volume.
Yeah. Well, that was my next question. So
yeah, I mean, we've been trying. Titan Books is actually interested, but it's taking a long time. I don't know why, but both Jim and I do want to do a second book. We've actually had an author lineup in place for a year, actually, for it, and some really big names that I can't say. And I, given that I now know the third movie has nothing to do with what I wanted to write about, I intend to include that. If we do ever get the green light, I want to write this. But it was going to be a sequel to Marvel's Terror on the Planet of the Apes.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, yes.
Okay, you don't need to say more. I'm already hooked up.
Yeah, because the thing was, what Jim and I were told with that book was anything from the classic era we were allowed to use, which surprised us because we figured they would just tell us you can use the 5 movies and that's it. That's what we expected to be told. The 5 movies are everything else is off the plate. Off the table. Off the plate. Where did I come up with that? Off the table, I meant. I guess I'm hungry. So Jim and I said, well, okay. We tentatively said, what about the TV series? And they said, well, that's the classic era. Go for it. So to our surprise, they let us put 3 stories based on the old TV show, which we never expected to happen. And so then my next thought was, oh, what about the comics? And no one seemed to have a problem with this. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna do a story based on Marvel, and that was my plan. So I didn't get to do that, but anybody who really knows the Marvel series and anyone who really knows Ty Templeton's Revolution on the Planet of the Apes, which was a miniseries from Mr. Comics, will see references to them in the story that I did publish.
Wow. Okay.
If you go back and read it and think in terms of Mendez's involvement in Marvel, because there's a story called Quest for Planet of the Apes in which Mendez appears. And if you go back to Revolution on the Planet of the Apes and look at Mendez and Culp, what their involvement in that was, that's actually discussed in the story that I wrote that appears in the book. So that was my way of saying, well, if I can't do my first story, damn it, I'm still going to reference the comics and see if anybody notices. So, because I mean, those of you who, if I know that a couple of you, I don't know if you all are, but a couple of you are on my Facebook page, and you've probably noticed that I kind of obsess over sci-fi comics. So I was determined that I was going to be one of the only, like that Jim and I were going to legitimize the old comics just because we love them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, somehow Terror is the 6th movie, so it really makes sense.
That's how I look at it. Yeah, that's how Doug Mensch wanted, approached it. He wanted that to be the 6th movie.
Yeah, even though it would have been the the craziest movie ever.
It would have been the kind of movie that you would picture if you made a cocktail out of LSD, hallucinogenic mushrooms,
Wow.
and gasoline, and then and set it on fire and drank it. That's basically what Terror on the Planet of the Apes is, and I say that with nothing but fondness because I love Terror on the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, it's
But
great.
it is the literary equivalent of taking LSD.
Yeah, I fully agree with that.
Right? It's absolutely insane. For those of you who haven't read it, Terror on the Planet of the Apes starts off as a very normal story that it logically takes place in Planet of the Apes. It fits it perfectly. It takes place some unspecified time after the fifth movie, with ape bigots who are hunting down and killing humans. It matches the tone of the fifth movie. It's about a young human and a young ape who are friends, and they find themselves in a weird situation when a guerrilla leader is deciding to sort of mount a coup, and he's the equivalent of being in the Ku Klux Klan. He and his fellow guerrillas dressed like Ku Klux Klan members. So it starts off as a story about racism. But after that arc ends, we start getting things like apes on giant frogs, and Viking apes, and apes dressed like Daniel Boone, and flying demon monkeys, and
Oh, really?
And robots
an alien
Cyborgs.
spaceship that's hidden under a mountain. And in this alien spaceship are bizarre multi-tentacled aliens. And we find out that there's a guy who lives inside Mount Rushmore, up in Abraham Lincoln's nose.
Okay.
And it just gets crazier and crazier from there. So it's a whole lot of fun, but like I say, you really feel like somebody slipped you some drugs when you weren't looking.
Okay.
This is one of the best story I ever read. This is so amazing.
Oh, I love it. It's absolutely. Please don't take anything I just said as mocking, because I love every bit of it. It's wonderfully insane.
I have just one question which wasn't prévu.
Planted.
This is about your actual story, which have been published. The King is Dead, Long Live the King.
Okay.
I was wondering what kind of name is Tiptonus for a gorilla?
Yeah, Tiptonus. Okay, here's the thing. The apes. That's a really funny question, actually. What I'll tell you why it's funny in a second. The apes in Planet of the Apes in the original movies tended to have Greco-Roman names like Cornelius and Zeus. I believe one of you knows the name Zeus, and so forth. But they also had names like Lisa. So the names were kind of all over the place, you know. So some of them conformed to a Greco-Roman type of naming, and then others were names like Lisa. So the names varied. And then when you get to the TV show, they had names like Mako that were totally made up, or Urko, which sound Greco-Roman but really isn't. And so when I was coming up with character names for my story, some of the names that I chose were more traditional. But then I realized I also had some freedom to make up names because that's what the apes apparently do. So at the time, Scott and David Tipton had written a story for IDW called Star Trek Planet of the Apes, The Primate Directive. And by the way, if you haven't read it, if you're an Apes fan or a Star Trek, I recommend it. It's fun. Yeah, but the title alone, The Primate Directive, is brilliant. That's a great pun. But because I'm friends with Scott had a character in that comic series, Lieutenant Handley. And Lieutenant Handley is a red shirt. He was shot. And so I found it hilarious that I'm a character in a story from my two favorite franchises. And so to repay Scott for doing that, I named it a gorilla Tiptonus.
Okay.
The reason why I say it was a funny question is that I don't think Scott ever noticed. So you noticed it, but I don't think Scott ever did. If he did, he never mentioned it to me. So.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Well, maybe I have a subsequent question because you said that in Tales from the Forbidden Zone there are of course stories that are set during the movies of the classic saga and also during the TV series, but there is also a very particular one written by Drew Gasca, who's in the animated in the cartoon, which is in fact tying up the movies and the TV series and the animated series. And
Yes.
I mean, this one is I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, as an Ape fan, this one I was really amazed the first time I read it. I mean, I knew I've already read before Conspiracy of the Planet of the Apes, and so it was not such a surprise that Drew Gasca knows so well this universe. But I know that you helped him out to write Conspiracy of the Planet of the Apes. Maybe you can tell us a bit about this.
Well, years ago, Drew asked for some editorial help on Conspiracy of the Planet of the Apes, and so I read over the manuscript for him and made some suggestions about what to change and how to improve it. I was originally going to be one of the co-authors. I was listed as story by, but that's another story. Yeah, I mean, there's not much to tell really there. That was years ago. That was for Blam Ventures, which was Drew's company. And then years later, I mean, when Titan Books gave me and Jim permission to do this, to do Tales from the Forbidden Zone, we turned in a list of authors that we wanted involved. And then apparently at the time, Titan was also planning to have Drew write a novel called Death on the Planet of the Apes. Yeah. And so they asked us to stick in one other story, which was by Drew. And that's the one you mentioned.
Okay.
It was interesting because the one classic aspect that we hadn't covered was the animated series. Not that I didn't want to, but just that nobody had pitched it. And that might partly be because those of us who enjoy the animated series enjoy it because it's bad. In some ways, it's genius. I love the fact that the animated series in a really bizarre way, the animated series is the closest to Pierre Boulle's original concept.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, indeed.
And in that it's 20th century architecture and apes riding around in cars and so forth. It also has some of the worst voice acting in the history of voice acting.
True. Yeah.
Every time I watch it, I crack up when I hear Nova say things like, Bill, Nova, that sort of thing. It's just, and Zira and Cornelius both sound like they're medicated.
Yeah, that's really the opinion I have as well. Yeah.
It's like they're half asleep.
Yeah, true.
Cornelius, we need to talk to Dr. Zayas. Like you expect her to fall asleep halfway through her speech. And so the animated series is a mixed bag. In many ways, it's really cool to see Boulle's original concept on the screen. In other ways, you have to wonder what they were doing. And so I think that's why nobody pitched the show. Nobody said, I really want to write a story about the cartoon General Urko and his orange outfit. And yet, so when Drew turned his in, I had to admit, I chuckled that not only did he reference the cartoon, but he actually referenced the fact that Urko's suit was orange. And
true.
That made me laugh because.
But that's how you understand. I mean, at first, that's how I understood. It was the animated series because he said it was orange.
Yeah. I think he probably did that on purpose.
Yeah.
At the time, Drew worked with Jim on that one, so I can't really speak for what Drew's mindset was. You'd have to ask him. But but I did laugh when I saw the fact that the suit was orange. That made it clear to me what he was doing.
Yeah. But to be honest, I'm currently reading the novelization of the animated series, and quite frankly, I really like it. I mean, the novelization, but I mean, they were not aiming the same public. I mean, it's more for adults. I mean, sometimes they are fighting, they are killing apes, and it's way better. The novelization is way better than the cartoon.
There's an interesting. If you've ever read interviews with people who write movie and TV novelizations, it's a fascinating subculture of fiction, because what you're really being asked to do is take someone else's work and just regurgitate it, right? So it's good pay if you can get it, but a lot of authors will tell you that it can be boring. You're handed a script and said, "Here, we already wrote this, write it again."
Yeah.
And so for some writers, they get a little bored with it. And what you end up with as a result, you either get a really dull, boring novelization, or if you're lucky, you get a writer who says, I want to make this interesting, not just for the readers, but for me. So I'm gonna do something unusual with this. And I've always believed that that's the case for the Planet of the Apes novelizations, both the live action show and the animated shows, because in both cases, they added things that weren't there in the show, and that made it worth it. But it's particularly true with the animated show that created new characters like Private Mungwort.
Yeah.
Mungwort is half gorilla, half chimpanzee.
Exactly.
And it's such a bizarre concept. Like somewhere, a gorilla and a chimpanzee decided to have children. Why? I don't know. I never chose to have, a child with an alligator, so I couldn't tell you. So one of throughout these 4 books, or these 3 books rather, is a recurring storyline that's not in the show, about the trials and tribulations of poor Private Mungwort and how he faces racism from his fellow soldiers because he's a half-breed. And I was not expecting that at all when I read the books. I really got a kick out of the fact that the writer seems to have basically said, I don't feel like just retelling the scripts. I'm going to create something different. And it works.
Yeah, I really agree with you. And the funniest is that this character, Mongrowth, is also in Conspiracy and Death of the Planet of the Apes.
Yes.
So that's very funny. And the Battle for the Planet of the Apes, I really like the novelization as well. I mean, the movie is what it is, but I mean, I really prefer the novelization.
Well, both the novelization and Marvel's adaptation of Battle made the movie better than it was, because in both cases they used earlier scripts and added material that never made it to the screen and made it better.
Yeah, I fully agree.
Yeah, and they had no concerns about budget.
Yeah,
so
that's also the thing. Yeah.
What you just said is very true. It's one of the reasons why I enjoy reading comics and novels in general. If you watch the original Star Trek back in the 60s, basically they go to a lot of planets where people are human, and there's a reason for this. It's easier, right? It's cheaper.
Of course.
You get creatures like the Mugato and the Horta, or you get Korab and Sylvia, who are little pipe cleaners on strings. But the thing is that there was not a big budget to make a lot of aliens, and that's part of the reason why from Star Trek: The Next Generation on, alien tends to mean Caucasian human with a bumpy nose, because like the universe is filled with people who just have nose bumps, and people mock that all the time, but I get why it happens. It's unfortunate, but it's because it's cheaper. But when you're writing a novel or a comic, I look at Marvel Comics has an intelligent planet named Ego, right? So
that's right.
If you did a TV show about an intelligent planet, that would be really cost prohibitive. You can put them in a movie, which they did, but to make a TV show about it would be expensive. Well, maybe not today, but it certainly would have been back in the 60s. And so that's one of the landscape for a writer is much, much huger on paper than it is on screen, because you can describe the most ridiculously fantastical creature you can imagine. And it doesn't cost anything more than a piece of paper and ink. So, right, as opposed to putting it on TV. I've decided I'm going to write about a creature that's 86 feet tall and has 536,000 wings. So like,
That's right.
but, that's absurd, right? But on paper, it costs about 0.01 cents worth of ink.
Yeah.
To put that on TV would be basically the gross national product of a small country. And so, that's the beauty of literature in general, is the landscape is infinite. There's no end to what you can write.
Yeah, that's right. I'm gonna go with a Star Trek question.
Okay.
Do you remember when you crossed the line from being a Star Trek fan to a Star Trek specialist?
When you say a specialist, do you mean like before? I guess I should qualify the question. Do you mean the point at which I was getting paid for it, or do you mean the point long before that when I realized I knew way too much about it?
The second part. The point you said.
So not about career, just
no.
The point where I stopped being just a casual fan. Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm. The moment you say, okay, I am a Trekkie or a Trekker, the moment you said, okay, I know everything or almost about Star Trek and why I love this.
Okay, to answer that part of that question, people say both here, Trekkie and Trekker, Trek fan. I don't really use labels, but people use both. I think for me, it was probably when I went to a store in 1980. And I saw a book called The Star Trek Spaceflight Chronology. And it was an unusual reference book. It was probably the first of its kind for Star Trek, which was a timeline book. And it broke down a fictional history. Because keep in mind, at the time, all there was the TV show and the cartoons and the first movie. That was it. And but it took 200 years of history going back to the time of the original series up to, I mean, like the 20th century up to the time of Star Trek, and created this entirely fictional story about how Khan rose in power and what the eugenics wars were and all that. And I leafed through it at the store and realized that I could pick out what was new and what was from the television show. And it was at that moment that I realized, I wouldn't be able to do this for Starsky and Hutch, and I wouldn't be able to do this for the Honeymooners, and I wouldn't, like, if I were picking up a TV show about Scooby-Doo, I wouldn't know what was from the cartoon and what was from the author's imagination. And so I bugged my mom to buy me that book. And I came home and I read it cover to cover over and over again, just amazed that somebody would take a TV show from when I was a baby and put that much thought into it. And it suddenly hit me that someday I wanted to do the same. Like, but that there was no other show at that point, because I was 12 years old, that I could imagine myself ever giving that much thought to. Now, as I got older, I found other things to give that much thought to, and I'm lucky my wife hasn't left me as a result. But at the time when I was 12, and I was so blown away by this book, that I immediately started saving up my allowance and buying all the other books I could find about a television show that was canceled when I was a child, when I was an infant. And I think at that point is when I realized, I think I have a problem.
we can relate to that. In a way.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that was a cool question. No one's ever asked me that. You guys have asked me several questions no one has ever asked me, and I've done a lot of interviews, so that this is fun. A lot of times you do an interview and someone says, "Why do you like Star Trek?" And you just sort of do a deep breath. Because, what's answer for number 7 again? So it's cool that you guys are coming up with questions that I would never have expected to be asked.
Okay, cool, great news.
Maybe that would be my last question, because I've asked a lot of questions already. But earlier you mentioned the name of Ed Gross, and so worked on Planet of the Apes Revisited, which happened to be the first book I read about Planet of the Apes. Apart from Pierre's Boulle novel, of course, but it was the first time I was reading something written by fans, by Planet of the Apes fans, and so this one I read it a lot of time. So I'm thinking about this book, and there are several books about Planet of the Apes. I'm also thinking about the legacy of Planet of the Apes or the making of Planet of the Apes. What do you think about these books?
I think they serve a great purpose to fans. These days, on the internet, you can find anything. If you could look up, what was Charlton Heston's favorite cheese when he was 5, and somewhere somebody has that information, right? But back when these books were being written, and this goes back to my talking about the Star Trek books that I found when I was a kid. Those books were the Bible for Planet of the Apes. It was not easy to find this information, and Ed Gross and his co-writers and the people who wrote these other books provided this amazing service because they took a franchise nobody was really talking about much at the time and provided such a wealth of information, and it still stands up today. Planet of the Apes Revisited is a great book.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's my favorite, to be honest. And maybe because Joe Russo and Larry Landsman, I think when they started, they were just fans.
Yes.
Giving rings to people who worked on the movies and try to get interviews. I mean, I really loved this book. I mean, I don't know if someday there will be a new version with the new movies. That I don't know. I wish there was a new one, because I mean, the reason why I'm just stressing this one out especially is because I have the feeling that there is not that much people talking about this book, while it's brilliant. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not a question. I just wanted to talk about this book, I guess.
Well, I do know whether or not that's being updated.
Oh.
It's not my place to really make someone else's announcement, but I can tell you that I'm helping Ed with something related to that.
Oh,
Cool.
That's a very good news.
I can't, I'm sure that it will at some point be announced.
Oh, that's a very good news. I mean, I don't need to hear more, but it's a very good news. Just tell him that in France there are some people who love his book.
Oh, I will let him know that. Yeah. And it's funny because I back when I was in college in the late 80s, I was reading books by Ed Gross. So I always assumed, because I was a college student, I just always assumed Ed was a good deal older than me if he was writing books. But it turns out, after Ed reached out to me, we realized we lived around the corner from each other.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we've gotten together for lunch a couple of times. We talk on the phone. Then it turns out Ed and I are very close in age, which is funny because that means that at the time that he wrote those books and I was a college student, he was probably around college age. And he had written a whole lot of Star Trek books. It was what he had written, unofficial Star Trek books back then. So it was kind of wild. It's kind of wild now, 30 years later, to be helping him with something. And Ed contributed to one of the books that I did, one of the Planet of the Apes books I did for Sequart. I did 2 essay anthologies about that franchise for Sequart. One focused on Planet of the Apes comics, and the other about the whole franchise. And Ed wrote an essay for me on that one, so that was fun. One of the nice things about getting involved with franchise work, since you guys asked about that before, is that you suddenly find yourself interacting with people whose work you've always liked. That never gets old. That is always cool.
But that's exactly what's happening tonight.
Well, okay, thank you. I really appreciate you saying that. My head is now 2 sizes too big.
No, but I mean, I have literally all these books. I have the pile of all these books just right next to me. My left hand is on the pile of the books as we speak. So
that's really very nice of you to say. I thank you so much. One of the unfortunate aspects of today's publishing world, and I've talked to a lot of writers about this particular problem, is that it's hard to tell if people are reading your books. You can look at Amazon and see reviews, but not everybody leaves them. And so it's a different world now. It used to be when a book came out, people would publish reviews and you'd know if you were getting read if people were writing them. But then it became, well, are people leaving book reviews on Amazon? Now you can come out with a book and nobody leaves a review on Amazon. And so sometimes it's hard to tell if people are reading your stuff. So it's nice to hear.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything Galactica related? I don't want anyone to feel left out.
Yeah, I've got something, but
Sure.
that could be related to the other franchises too, because I wanted to talk about remakes, reboots, and spin-offs.
Okay.
The three franchises that we represent today have known their share of new versions by people who sometimes did something very different from what the original creator envisioned. And BattleStar Galactica is one of the very few IPs where the reboot he's seen as being way better than the original. But we didn't know that when it was originally announced. And at the time, many fans were very cautious, if not opposed, to the reboot. And now that a new BattleStar Galactica spin-off is in the works, many fans have the same feeling again, because they don't want anyone to mess with their favorite show. But some other fans are very excited. So. And this could also apply to the next Disney Planet of the Apes movies, or maybe the feeling you had when, when Discovery or Picard were announced. And I wanted to know what's your feeling towards this phenomenon.
Okay, that is a fantastic question. And it's relevant because recently I was talking with somebody about the fact that people get so upset over changes made in Picard and Discovery. Mm-hmm. And I can remember people getting really upset that Voyager took place in a different part of the galaxy and had a female captain. And people were really upset that Deep Space Nine took place in a station instead of going out to explore strange new worlds. And I can remember when people got really upset that the captain of the Enterprise was an old French guy with an English accent. And that everybody looked like they were wearing leotards, right? So it's in other words, fans forget that things change a lot. Yeah. And so they remain resistant to changes. I'm sure that when the next Star Trek show, Lower Decks, comes out, people are going to be saying, but it's nothing like the 1970s cartoon. So here's the thing. When it comes to the Galactica reboot, I totally related to what you were describing for a very specific reason, which is this. In 2003, when we were waiting with bated breath for this thing to air, I hate to admit this, but I was in that group going, it's not Battlestar Galactica. Oh my goodness. I just totally turned into Dr. Zayas for some reason. Be careful, Taylor. Battlestar Galactica is out there. But in case, I guess my old man voice is Zayas for some reason. But in any case, I turned into this crotchety old man who refused to accept reboots. And then I wondered what the hell was my problem, because by this point I'd already seen other reboots, and a lot of them suck, but they're not all bad. And the truth is, I went into the Galactica miniseries with the wrong attitude, which was, oh my God, they're changing things. They're changing the story. And what do you mean Starbucks nickname, a call sign, not a person's name? What do you mean Starbucks name is Kara? No, Starbucks name is Starbuck, damn it. And so I watched the first night of the miniseries and said, I hate this. And I watched the second night of the miniseries and I said, I hate this. And my friend Paul said, who are you? Why are you? This is so up your alley. Why are you disliking this? And then I thought about it and said, I don't know what the problem. I can't connect with this. I don't like these characters. I don't like anything about it. But a year later, however long it was later, that the first weekly episode aired, when they showed Water and 33, 5 minutes later, 5 minutes into that first episode, I said, oh my God, I love this. Something had changed, and I realized what it was. It wasn't the show, it was me. I was, for some reason, that type of fan I can't stand. When that miniseries aired, I was reluctant, so I went back and watched it again after watching Water in 33 and realized, yeah, I'm an idiot. That was really good. I don't know, and from that point on, Galactica, the reboot of Galactica became one of my favorite series of all time. To the extent, as you said, where now I go back and watch the original that I was defending so much, and I go, oof. That original is a whole lot of fun. It really is. But let's be honest, that cast they're not all Oscar winners.
No,
and
that's right.
The effects largely involve showing the same hand moving the same joystick in the same direction 800 times. And Hector and Vector, oh my God.
Oh, that's awful. And,
people complain about Wesley Crusher and Jar Jar Binks. They have nothing on Hector and Vector.
Yeah.
And so then there's the new Galactica, which really only has one episode that is truly god awful, in my opinion. It's Black Market.
Oh yeah, I can see why.
Because an entire episode about the fact that Lee Adama hires a prostitute.
Yeah, that's.
It's just
weird.
It's so out of character and added nothing, and nothing that happened in that episode mattered ever again.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: that's the only episode of that show that I could think of that I really never wish to see again. Even other episodes that aren't that great, they're fun. And that's the amazing thing about this reboot. It's so much better than the original. And honestly, I can't think of, other than Chris Nolan's Batman movies, I can't think of that many reboots where I say this is far better than what came before.
Yeah, that's rare. That's very rare, yeah. But as fans, I have the feeling that sometimes we tend to become Zayas in the way that we tend to become the keepers of the sacred scrolls,
Yes, well said.
And that's a good parallel. I like it. Thank you for that. And
it was entirely accidental. I didn't mean to break into Zayas mode, but you're welcome.
But I was just wondering why we some of us have a hard time to accept new concepts within the same universe that we know and love. Well, I guess it's just the way it is. I don't know.
I think it's just how we're hardwired. It's part of. Yeah. I think it's part. It goes back to our lizard brain. That base part of ourself, the core of our brain, that gets nervous when we hear footsteps, because things that are different and unexpected pose a danger to us in the wild. If you're out in the wild and you hear a noise, it makes you have a natural instinct to want to run away from it, right? And so when you're sitting in your comfy house with a locked door, eating popcorn, watching television, it's a totally different experience, but you still have the same brain in your head.
Yeah.
And so sitting in your house and having someone say, "Oh, look, we made Starbuck a woman." Yeah, that's not the same as, "Oh, by the way, there's a wolf outside waiting to eat you." It's not the same in the slightest, but it still stimulates the idea of, I wasn't expecting that. I think that's part of why I wasn't expecting that. But then the difference, of course, is that at no point would you ever say, "I'm really glad that bear ate me." But that was a good. I should never have been afraid of the bear. It turns out that being eaten by the bear was a good thing. So, on the other hand, you then go, all right, Cara Thrace is one of the greatest characters ever to appear on television. I was foolish for not being open to this. So, it's a certain degree. You guys might find this funny. I mentioned before that the reason I'm a sci-fi fan is due to my mom. Well, when Star Trek: The Next Generation was announced, I read it. I showed my mom an article in Starlog about it, and she said, "I don't care what you say, it's not Star Trek." And that was her quote. "I don't care what you say, it's not Star Trek." And I kind of laughed because I knew that she was going to watch it. I mean, it was her favorite TV show. Of course, she was going to watch the sequel. And after Encounter at Farpoint, the pilot aired, I called her from college and I said, "So what'd you think?" and there was a pause, and then she said, and I could hear a smile in her voice, "I don't care what you say, it's not Star Trek." This time, when she was saying it, it was her way of saying to me, "I was wrong. I love this."
Okay.
And
Okay.
that became a running joke for us for the next 30 years. So Deep Space Nine came out. "I don't care what you say, it's not Star Trek." Voyager, "I don't care what you say, it's not Star Trek. And meanwhile, she's watching all of it and calling me and saying, "Hey, did you watch this episode? It was great." But then it got even more ridiculous. Babylon 5, "I don't care what you say, it's not Star Trek." Well, that's true. It's not Star Trek. That's very true. You know, so I called her one day. I was watching an episode of The Golden Girls, which is I don't know if you have it there, but it's a silly sitcom about old ladies. And I called her and said, "Mom, I'm watching The Golden Girls. I don't care what you say. It's not Star Trek." Yeah. So I was very sad when Star Trek. My mother died a year ago, and Star Trek Picard aired. And the first thing I thought when I watched the first episode was, who's going to say to me, "I don't care what you say, it's not Star Trek"?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that's just some kind of reflex that we
I think
have.
that's what it is. Yeah, I think we're wired to resist change because it keeps us safe.
Okay. Yeah. I agree with
Very
that.
interesting answer. Yeah.
But the converse, the opposite of this is that we are also wired to adapt, because if we weren't, we would have died out as a species a long time ago.
Yeah.
So we're capable of saying, "It's not Star Trek," but we're also capable of saying, "Well, maybe it is."
Yeah.
And that's growth, right? That's the very core of intelligence, is recognizing it was wrong.
Yeah.
Or I can see another viewpoint that I didn't see before.
Well, I guess that's it. It's a very good explanation. Thank you. That's it for me. Who else has?
Well, I think we've asked pretty much all of our questions. I mean, I get the answers. I get much more than I was expecting. So for me, it's okay.
I hope I didn't say too much. I hope I wasn't talking too much.
No! Oh no! I mean,
no!
Don't worry.
Okay. I thought this was a fun interview. I enjoyed this, so I just kept going.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, just to hear your answer, it's perfect. I mean, I already had a great time, to be honest.
Oh, good.
I did too. Yeah, thank you very much for all this. It was a real pleasure talking with you.
It was my pleasure to be asked. If ever you want to do this again, let me know.
Oh,
okay.
Okay, what do you do tomorrow?
Yeah. So tomorrow I'm actually going out on a trip. Oh, I can't even say that.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, but seriously, let me know.
Okay.
Well, someday maybe. I mean, in some way, I mean, I can tell I'm asking you a lot of questions, but you were not aware. Each time I'm preparing an episode and I need to check something, or I'm wondering, oh, maybe this character is also is somewhere else, and I just open lexicon of Planet of the Apes. Or I mean, I'm currently working on an episode regarding the different timeline of Planet of the Apes, and as you can imagine, I mean, your book is a tremendous help. And each time in my episode, I'm saying that I use. I mean, I based my research upon several sources and of course your books. So I don't know.
That's a great thrill to hear. Thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah, but in fact, also to me, because I don't know how to say that, but I mean. In the first place, the reason why I started to do a podcast dedicated to Planet of the Apes is because there is not that much, in fact. I mean, in French, I'm not aware of any other, and even in English, I mean, at the time I started, there was Talking Apes, which is in fact which is about the TV series. Not even. I mean, they are sometimes talking about the movies, but it's really They are really talking about the TV series, and so there was not that much. So that's. I mean, I decided to start one because I wanted to listen to a podcast dedicated to Planet of the Apes, and I mean it's also my contribution. I mean, I love this universe, and I want this universe to just to continue to live. And so that's why when there are discussions regarding the fact that maybe there will be a reboot or remake with Disney, to be honest, I'm happy. Even if it's not great, even if I don't like the movies, it means that there will still be novelizations or still novel or comic books. I want this. I don't want this universe to die. So that's. I mean, that's my very small contribution. And if I can, if some people listening to my podcast, if they are then eager to read your books or other books, then for me, it's, it's like if I was winning the golden medal in the Olympics. I don't know if I make sense.
No, absolutely. Amen, brother. I'm with you on every step of that. And it's an honor to hear that you're basing your research on my books. I unfortunately for you, the books came out a decade ago, so they don't include anything from the new movies. They don't include anything from Boom Studios comics and or the new novels, or ironically my own fiction book. So that none of that stuff's even in there. Mm-hmm. I wish they did. And here's the thing: one of the questions people always ask me, "Are you ever going to update those books?" At one point, I was planning to, not to end the interview on a depressing note, but I mentioned before that my friend Paul had passed away. Paul helped me come up with making his book. He designed everything. The very idea of updating these books without him, my heart's not in it. Mm. And so no, I won't be. But at the same time, it pains me that there's nothing from Boom Studios or from the Andy Serkis movies in there. I wish there were, but I also don't want the franchise to die. It's one of the very first things I ever got into when I was a kid, and because they had Planet of the Apes week on television here every year. Mm-hmm. I could not wait to see these movies, and so yeah, I get where you're coming from. When I did the first Apes book I ever did, which was Timeline, it was for the very reason that you do your podcast. I wanted to contribute something back to a franchise that I love. So, that's the very best reason to do it.
I guess so.
Yeah. I also relate to that a lot. Yeah. And I was very lucky because I launched my podcast thinking that no one was talking about Galactica anymore, and a few months later they announced the spin-off. So, but yeah, the idea is to keep the franchise alive at the start. Yeah. So
I'm very much looking forward to the new Galactica, which is funny given everything I said about the reboot. But I learned my lesson. And regardless of what they do with it at this point, it's already been rebooted. So I think people will be open to it now. It's kind of like I don't know if you guys are fans of the James Bond movies, but when Sean Connery stepped down, George Lazenby came in and people hated him. Yeah. Now people say George Lazenby's movie was one of the best, and as it happens, it is. I think On Her Majesty's Secret Service might be the best one in the series, but at the time, people hated it for the one simple reason: he wasn't Sean Connery. Yeah. It wouldn't have mattered what he did differently. It wouldn't have mattered what the writers did differently. People at this point had 5 Connery films, and they wanted a 6th. And there were 2 more, of course, but that was after Lazenby, and that was because Lazenby, Lazenby had bad advice. He was supposed to do another one, and a friend stupidly told him to hold out for more money. It was a really bad decision. Yeah. Oh. But fans for years used to say that was the worst movie in the series, and I thought that's impossible, because Moonraker exists. And but what's happened though now is that over time has been kind. People already had the reboot. People had several actors playing him, and then when Daniel Craig came in, the series was rebooted. So at this point, whatever happens, the audience's mindset is primed. Everyone will be ready for whatever change, because change is now part of that universe. And I think the same thing is now true of Galactica. Whatever it ends up being. I mean, there are rumors that there's a TV show and a movie coming, and they're in different universes.
Yeah.
And if that's true, we'll now have 4 versions of Galactica. 5 if you count Galactica 1980, but don't count Galactica 1980.
No, please don't.
And you know what? At this point, I think a lot of us are going to say, "Cool, bring it on."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean,
look,
people accepted the DC universes with Ben Affleck did it, even though they had just seen all the movies with Christian Bale, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because at this point, change is part of DC universe.
Yeah.
Whereas it isn't for every franchise. If look at the reaction to Chris Pine as Pike, it was polarizing. Now I think Chris Pine I said Pike. Listen to me. I meant to say as Kirk.
Kirk.
Pine and Pike. That's why I did that. But Chris Pine as Kirk was polarizing. People saw him and said, "That's not Kirk." And I thought to myself, actually, he did a really good job. I like him a lot. But I think I think time is going to be kinder to those movies, because that was the first time Star Trek had been rebooted. It hadn't been the first sequel, obviously, but it was the first time that was truly rebooted, and a lot of people were outraged. If ever Star Trek is fully rebooted again, people will be nicer, I think.
Maybe.
And I think it's going to be true if to tie this all together, if the next Galactica series and the next Apes movies are reboots, I think people will be kinder than they were in the past, because their brains are already wired now to accept it. They're no longer going to see it as being eaten by a bear.
Yeah, that's a great conclusion, I think.
Yeah, I think so as well.
All right, guys, thank you so much. This was fun.
Yeah, it was
Thank
really
you very
fun.
much for your time. It was really kind of you to accept the invitation.
Mm-hmm.
So
not at all.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, so we're off now? Okay.
Well, thank you very, very, very much, Rich. I hope you, your family, and your closest friends will be fine during those weird times.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The same to you three.
Ah putain, c'était cool, hein.
C'était
C'est
incroyable.
génial.
Putain, il est trop cool, ce mec.
Ouais.
Putain, j'aurais pu passer des heures à l'écouter, quoi.
Bah oui, tu m'étonnes.
Ben voilà, donc on sort de cette interview, je le disais en intro, totalement incroyable de Rich Handley. Avant toute chose, il faut quand même le signaler, ce type est formidable.
Ouais, il est génial.
On est d'accord tous les trois pour dire que c'est quelqu'un de extrêmement sympathique.
Ouais. La manière dont ça s'est passé, c'était vraiment... Voilà, il nous a tout de suite mis à l'aise et vraiment c'était vraiment hyper agréable de. Je pense que pour une fois j'ai quasiment pas parlé, ce qui en dit long. Hein.
Pas faux. C'est une bonne échelle de mesure, ouais.
Ah ouais, j'étais tout de suite, quoi. J'avais pas envie. Enfin, j'ai peut-être interrompu une fois ou deux, mais j'avais pas envie, quoi. Tu vois de. Ah c'est. Non, ouais, c'est le genre de gars. Moi, je pourrais les écouter parler pendant des heures, quoi.
Ah, bien sûr, c'était passionnant.
Une gentillesse, ça fait du c'est ce que je veux dire, ça va peut-être sonner du bisounours ou quoi, mais j'en ai rien à foutre. Enfin, ça fait tellement de bien de parler avec des gens comme ça, quoi. C'est toujours tu vois, c'est la même chose quand on va à Podren, etc. Quand tu parles avec des gens passionnés, ça fait c'est rafraîchissant, ça fait vraiment du bien, quoi.
Ouais, c'est génial. Et moi, je tiens aussi à préciser, à remercier Rémi, en fait, d'avoir organisé tout ça.
Parce que tout ça, c'est grâce à toi.
Ah ouais, clairement. Hein. Vraiment, c'est cool, c'est super cool. On a
D'ailleurs,
passé un super moment là.
est-ce que tu peux peut-être expliquer à nos auditeurs, enfin, à moins que tu n'aies pas envie, mais moi je trouve que c'est marrant la manière dont cette interview, comment tout ça, ça s'est fait.
Ben, non. Non, je déconne bien sûr. Désolé. Ouais, la fatigue commence à arriver, du coup ça va être beaucoup de blagues pourries. Ben en fait, il y a quelques mois, donc je suivais Rich sur... je l'ai demandé en ami sur Facebook, parce qu'il est pas sur Twitter, hein.
Non, je crois pas.
Ouais, et je le suivais sur Facebook parce que, ben, en fait, c'est après avoir écouté certaines de tes émissions, Zaius, je me suis dit quand même, ce type, il a l'air super cool. Et je me suis mis je l'ai demandé à un ami sur Facebook et je me suis mis à le stalker un peu comme ça. Et plus ça allait, plus je le trouvais, mais vraiment super sympa. Et je lisais certaines de ses interviews, des trucs comme ça, et je trouvais que c'était une personne vraiment particulièrement sympa. Et d'ailleurs, je lui ai dit dans un anglais affreux, mais affreux à l'écrit, c'était horrible. Tu sais, c'est le genre, je lui ai écrit un paragraphe hein, que j'ai même pas passé au traducteur. Et à la fin du paragraphe, je me relis et je me dis oh là là, c'est affreux, c'est horrible, je peux pas envoyer ça.
Ah,
Bah allez, tant pis. Et je l'ai quand même envoyé. Et je me suis dit, mais quand même, j'ai craint. Et je l'ai passé sur le traducteur. Même un traducteur automatique n'a pas compris ce que je disais.
Ah ouais, d'accord.
Et donc quand
Non.
quand il dit, je sais plus quoi, au début de l'interview, là, quand il dit non Rémi, on te comprend tout à fait, c'est pas vrai, c'est absolument pas vrai. Enfin bref. Et du coup, il y a quelques mois, c'était il y a presque un an, je crois, il envoie une question, il disait je sais qu'il y a des Français qui sont amis avec moi et j'aurais besoin de votre aide parce que je suis en train de faire éditer une traduction de vieux comic book paru uniquement en France et en Belgique de Galactica. Parce qu'en fait, il y a... Donc ça date dans les débuts des années 80. Il y a un magazine qui s'appelle Télé Junior. En Belgique, qui s'appelle Super J, pour Super Junior, qui diffusait des bandes dessinées françaises d'aventures Galactica. Et d'ailleurs, je sais pas, t'en as lu Draven, toi?
Non, j'ai pas eu l'occasion d'en lire et il y en a quelques-unes qui sont trouvables d'occasion. Faudra quand même que je m'en procure, mais non, j'ai malheureusement pas eu l'occasion d'en lire. J'ai lu des articles à leur sujet, mais j'en ai jamais lu.
Ben, alors voilà, pour avoir eu la chance d'en tenir entre les mains, c'est très léger, tu sais, c'est vraiment des histoires, des aventures simples et fun. J'aurais dû les scanner, j'y pense maintenant, tu sais. Il y avait même un des magazines que j'ai eu dans la main avec un dossier spécial Star Trek, La colère de Khan. Je l'ai juste
excellent.
feuilleté, je l'ai même pas lu parce que tu sais, le truc il est arrivé super bien emballé et tout machin. Je me suis dit allez, je le déballe. Je l'ai ouvert mais j'ai même pas pensé à le scanner. Je l'ai même pas vraiment lu en profondeur. J'ai juste feuilleté. Enfin bref. Et du coup en fait il faut savoir que ces magazines sont assez facilement trouvables hein, sur tout ce qui est eBay, Rakuten, tout ça. Mais il y en a 4-5 qui sont assez compliqués à obtenir. On ne sait pas pourquoi, on en a parlé très longtemps avec Rich, il me disait j'ai fait des études, il n'y a pas eu d'histoire de rupture dans les diffusions, il n'y a pas eu d'incendie qui aurait brûlé tout un stock, enfin on ne sait pas pourquoi, il y a 4-5 numéros qui sont assez compliqués à trouver. Et de toute façon, en tant qu'Américain, il n'avait pas accès à certaines parties de eBay, ni Rakuten. Donc, il y en avait 4 en particulier qui n'arrivaient pas à trouver. Et donc, on en a trouvé sur un seul mois 3 presque immédiatement. Ça coûte dans la vingtaine d'euros à peu près. Si vous les trouvez à plus cher que 20 euros, ça vaut pas le coup. Franchement, si vous cherchez un petit peu plus longtemps, entre 15 et 20 euros par là. Sans les frais de port. Et il y en a un, par contre, ça fait 8 mois. 8 mois qu'on est dessus, depuis l'été dernier, donc depuis l'été 2019. On cherche. Et incroyable, introuvable. C'était une horreur absolue. Et c'est lui qui a fini par le trouver. Et seulement le bouquin était vendu dans un lot. Et, d'ailleurs, un lot particulièrement cher pour ce qu'il y avait. Il avait mis tous les Super J, les Télé Junior et 2-3 autres magazines, je sais plus quoi. Mais vraiment des trucs basiques des années 80. Il y avait une vingtaine de bouquins et ils vendaient ça pour, je sais plus, 100 ou 120 euros. Alors que franchement, ça vaut pas le coup, quoi. Et du coup, il lui a envoyé un mail, et c'est ce que je disais, quand les Français sont des cons, le mec lui a même pas répondu. Et du coup, il m'a dit, est-ce que tu peux le contacter quand même? Donc je lui envoie un message, je lui dis, oui, bonjour, je représente Monsieur Rich Handley. Ça, c'est incroyable d'envoyer ce genre de message, c'est très drôle. Et le gars, il me dit, ouais, non, ça m'embête de casser mon lot et tout. Je lui dis, mais c'est pas un lot que vous vendez, il y a aucune continuité. Donc on vous en propose tant. Et on lui en a proposé plus cher que la moyenne, et c'est notre seule offre. Et il a dit, ok. Et donc la preuve que le type, il savait très bien ce qu'il faisait, il savait qu'il avait le dessus. Enfin bref. Ouais. Et du coup, j'envoie ça à Rich, et il me dit, s'il y a le moindre service que je peux te rendre, n'hésite pas. Je lui dis, écoute, je connais 2 gars qui sont intéressés, qui t'aiment bien et qui seraient intéressés pour faire une interview. Mais ce qu'il faut savoir, c'est que je lui envoie le colis, et donc je vais à la poste, et les 4 premiers bouquins, ils sont partis, et une semaine après, ils étaient arrivés chez lui. Donc j'étais surpris par la vitesse, en fait, d'arriver aux États-Unis. Ouais. Le gars m'avait dit 1 ou 2 semaines par là, donc j'avais prévenu Rich que ça serait dans les 2 semaines. Et là, j'envoie le colis, donc il me dit ça, machin. Donc nous, on commence à se préparer, on commence à en parler. Et le colis n'arrive pas. Je regarde le suivi, j'étais à punaise, il est toujours bloqué en France. J'appelle la poste et tout, et ils me disent non, je sais pas pourquoi, le colis est bloqué à, je sais pas, une ville, Noirmoutier ou un truc comme ça. Incroyable. Et j'attends, et en fait, il se trouve que ça coïncidait avec les événements du début du blocage du coronavirus. Et en fait, les États-Unis ont complètement bloqué tous les courriers qui arrivaient d'Europe. Et du coup, il a mis 1 mois à arriver, parce qu'en fait, c'est pas tant qu'il l'ait bloqué, c'est qu'il l'ait laissé quelques jours en quarantaine, puis il est testé en arrivée apparemment. Et évidemment, vu qu'il n'y avait pas... Enfin, évidemment, je dis évidemment non, mais j'habite dans le Gers, un coin très reculé, où le premier cas n'est arrivé que plusieurs semaines plus tard. Donc le courrier était sain. Mais du coup, voilà, j'ai eu super chaud, parce que j'avais pas pris d'assurance pour celui-là, ce qui est complètement bête de ma part. Mais j'ai eu très peur que le colis n'arrive pas, et que Rich me dit, t'es un trou de cul, je te fais pas ton interview. Enfin bref, voilà. Et du coup, je sais plus. Qu'est-ce que c'était la question?
C'était ça que tu racontes ouais. comment on est arrivé là. Je pense que tu as fait une réponse assez complète.
Ouais, désolé, je me suis perdu un peu. Mais du coup, voilà, il a accepté très gentiment.
Ok, excellent. Vraiment, c'était une super occasion. Franchement, merci.
Non, c'était vraiment, vraiment très chouette. Puis voilà, ce qu'il faut quand même préciser, c'est qu'il est... les réponses qu'il a apportées étaient... Même si on s'en doutait un peu qu'il allait être généreux dans ses réponses, c'est quand même au-delà de ce qu'on espérait, quoi.
Ouais.
Vraiment, ouais. Il nous a pas pris par-dessus la jambe, il a traité nos questions avec beaucoup de sérieux, alors que pour lui, on est de parfaits inconnus. Et ça, c'est vraiment, vraiment appréciable.
Et je pense qu'il avait aussi un peu le besoin de parler, parce que je sais pas si vous vous souvenez, au début de l'émission, il disait je suis très stressé à cause de toute cette affaire de confinement, tout ça. Et je pense que le fait de parler, ça l'a libéré. J'ai trouvé qu'il se sentait bien dans l'émission, dans l'enregistrement.
En tout cas, c'est l'impression que ça donnait, ouais.
Ouais, clairement. Ouais, il avait l'air super à l'aise. Il était content de parler avec nous. Enfin, j'espère, mais en tout cas, c'est aussi le feeling que j'ai eu, quoi.
Ouais,
non, c'était vraiment génial.
Pardon. Bravo à tous les deux, parce que c'était assez... bravo pour pour votre qualité d'élocution en anglais. C'était incroyable. Moi, j'étais oh là 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 là, c'est incroyable, je me croirais à la télé. En train d'écouter un vrai podcast. Enfin, j'étais ouf. Parce qu'il faut savoir que moi, alors je comprends tout à fait l'anglais. Je regarde que les films, tous les films en version originale. Je lis pas mal de bouquins en anglais, mais j'ai beaucoup de difficultés à m'exprimer. Du coup, merci d'avoir traduit mes questions, de les avoir arrangées et de les avoir dites pour moi, parce que j'étais vraiment mal à l'aise de faire ce truc en début, et c'était cool. Donc lui il disait qu'il était tout à fait Rich expliquait qu'il était tout à fait ouvert pour si on a d'autres interviews, mais pourquoi pas un jour continuer d'envoyer des mails par-ci par-là, envoyer des gens à d'autres personnes qui ont, parce qu'il y a beaucoup de connexions entre la planète des singes, le BattleStar Galactica et Star Trek, et pourquoi pas contacter d'autres personnes comme ça qui auraient pu avoir le nez ou les mains un peu dans ces trois univers.
Oui, bien sûr.
Ouais.
C'est clair.
Un jour, c'est pas.
Avec joie.
De question. Il y a un petit moment où je voulais en parler avec vous et qui m'a fait beaucoup rire. C'est un moment où Rich disait qu'il avait beaucoup apprécié vos questions parce que c'était pas des questions qu'on lui pose habituellement.
Mais aussi. Il a fait ce compliment pour tes questions aussi.
Oui,
ouais. Et il disait, parce que d'habitude on me pose la question qu'est-ce que vous aimez dans Star Trek, et là de suite je suis allé sur le Google Drive et j'ai supprimé la question mais qu'est-ce qui te plaît dans Star Trek.
En plus, t'es dur avec toi-même. T'es dur avec toi-même parce que c'était pas ça ta question. Ta question, elle était pas conne du tout. C'était pas ça ta question.
C'était. Alors je me souviens plus exactement la tournure, mais c'est un peu ça. Si.
C'est qu'est-ce qui vous inspire qu'est-ce qui t'inspire le plus dans Star Trek. C'est quand même c'est une question quand même beaucoup plus intéressante que qu'est-ce que tu aimes dans Star Trek. Ta question, elle est pas plate. Non. Je trouve que t'es dur avec toi-même.
Non. Voilà. Je sais pas, qu'est-ce que vous avez à retenir de cette interview qui était incroyable. C'est le mot de la soirée pour moi.
Juste moi ce que je retiendrai, c'est que oui, effectivement, peut-être qu'il faut pas être timide et pas hésiter à contacter des gens dont on admire le travail. Déjà, ne serait-ce que pour leur dire, en fait, parce que c'est vrai ce que dit aussi Rich, que finalement il n'y a pas tant de gens que ça qui laissent des commentaires et tout. Et honnêtement, j'ai jamais laissé le moindre commentaire sur aucun de ces bouquins. Et je me dis en fait, je suis con, pourquoi je le fais pas? Et donc je le fais très rarement. Mais c'est vrai qu'à chaque fois, des fois, ça fait du bien de dire à un artiste ou à un auteur simplement j'ai bien aimé ça, ou telle chose, pareil, parce que là, j'en parle dans la musique, j'ai eu aussi l'occasion de rencontrer des gens dont j'apprécie énormément la musique, et même dont certains sont des amis, hein. Et parfois, on a encore plus de pudeur quand c'est des amis, mais ça m'est arrivé quand même de dire à des gens, tu sais, t'as fait tel disque ou telle chanson, ça m'a accompagné à telle époque de ma vie, et souvent la réponse, elle est cool, quoi. Tu sens que les gens, ça les laisse pas indifférents, en fait, quand on leur dit ce genre de choses, donc faut pas avoir peur, en fait, de dire... Et encore une fois, je dis ça alors que je suis mal placé pour le dire, parce que je le fais trop peu souvent, mais ça fait du bien aussi de dire à quelqu'un que son travail compte pour nous.
C'est vrai, c'était une super occasion de faire ça, puisque moi j'ai aussi un de ses bouquins. Il a moins écrit sur Galactica, mais quand même, c'était aussi une de mes sources d'infos pour mon podcast. Et donc voilà, il y avait ça qui était cool à faire. Il y avait de parler comme ça à quelqu'un qui est à l'autre bout du monde, qui est là je vais enfoncer des portes ouvertes, hein, mais qui est à l'autre bout du monde, qu'on connaît pas plus que ça non plus. On connaît un peu ses œuvres et tout. Mais en fait, on est tous réunis pour parler des passions qu'on a en commun et ça match quoi, ça match bien. On peut plaisanter, on peut avoir une vraie discussion. Parce que c'est ça aussi que je suis super content qu'on a réussi à faire, je crois. C'est une vraie discussion quoi. C'est pas on a posé une question, on a attendu qu'il réponde, qu'il ait fini et puis on passe à la question suivante. Non, on a appris des trucs, on a rebondi sur des trucs et tout. Ça, je suis super content aussi que ça se soit passé comme ça, quoi. Mais c'est parce que lui est quelqu'un de vraiment super cool et qu'en plus, il connaît son sujet, mais alors d'une manière qui est juste incroyable pour nous. Et donc, voilà, non, c'était top, quoi. C'est génial, ça, ce genre d'expérience. Merci Rémi encore, hein, franchement. Vraiment, j'ai pas fini de le dire.
Non, mais faut
Mais
pas.
c'est vrai quoi. Mais pareil, mais finalement c'est peut-être une conclusion. Moi, ma conclusion, c'est peut-être une conclusion qui est plus Star Trekienne que c'est que au final, ouais, effectivement, on est séparés par un océan, mais ça va sonner très très discours Miss France, hein, ce que je veux dire, mais je l'assume complètement. Voilà, on est peut-être séparés par un océan, on n'a peut-être pas la même langue maternelle et peut-être pas tout à fait la même culture. Bon, quand bien même, voilà, on a quand même d'une culture occidentale dans tous les cas. Mais voilà, il y a une passion, c'est aussi, enfin là en l'occurrence des passions en commun, c'est aussi ouais, c'est une identité qu'on a en commun quoi. Donc voilà, donc donnons-nous tous la main.
Tu te moques un peu de mon accent là, non?
Ouais.
Ouais. Non, mais après, bon, d'un point de vue positif, il vaut mieux faire des conclusions sur la vraie vie à la Star Trek plutôt que de faire des conclusions à la planète des singes où on va tous crever de toute façon qu'on est des sous-merdes.
De toute façon, moi, je balance une bombe atomique à la fin de cet épisode, hein, je vous préviens.
Où tu pleures des larmes de sang.
Ou je peux faire les deux en même temps.
Ouais, nickel. Merci beaucoup. À bientôt peut-être.
Oui, à très bientôt. On trouvera d'autres raisons de se réunir tous les trois. Merci aux auditeurs, aux auditrices. Dites-nous, hein. Il a dit, Rich, il faut nous dire hein, ce que vous en avez pensé.
Ah non, je serais curieux d'avoir des retours là-dessus. Peut-être aussi qu'on va avoir des auditeurs anglophones qui nous ont jamais écoutés jusque-là.
Ah ouais. Du coup, il va falloir refaire toute cette conversation en anglais.
Ouais. Oh putain. Oh merde.
Okay.
This was very fun to do. Thank you very much.
Oh merde. Je pense qu'il est vraiment temps qu'on conclue. Mais là, en fait, je suis un peu... parce que d'habitude, quand... Tu sais, j'ai l'impression comment on conclut, bordel? Parce que si c'était un épisode de Cornelius and Zira classique, je sais comment je le conclue. J'ai conclu tous de la même manière, mais là c'est un peu... Comment qu'on fait, bordel? Si vous avez écouté cet épisode dans un Viper en faisant le salut vulcain, vous étiez dans le vrai. D'ici au prochain épisode, portez-vous bien, prenez soin de vous et ceux que vous aimez, et à bientôt les centurions.
Salut les primates.
Et longue vie et prospérité.